Introduction: when the law becomes the monster. For nearly half a century, Judge Dredd has stood as one of the most unique and terrifying figures in comic book history. He is not a superhero. He is not a villain. He is not even an antihero in the traditional sense. He is the law itself, an unflinching, unyielding force of order in a world that has surrendered its freedom for security. Most anti-heroes, from Batman to the Punisher, operate on some level of personal justice. They act outside the law because they believe the law is broken. Judge Dredd, on the other hand, does not believe in justice. He believes in the law. In a dystopian future where civilization has collapsed, crime is rampant, and democracy has failed, Megacity 1 relies on an elite force of judges who act as judge, jury, and executioner. Among them, Judge Dredd is the most feared, the most ruthless, and the most dedicated to enforcing absolute order. He does not question the system. He does not doubt his duty. He does not hesitate to kill in the name of the law. But the most disturbing thing about Judge Dredd is this: he is not the villain. At least, not in the way we think of villains. Dredd is a paradox. He is both the only thing holding society together and the greatest symbol of its oppression. Without him, the world would collapse into chaos. With him, the world remains trapped in tyranny. And that is what makes him the most terrifying, most thought-provoking, and most important anti-hero in comic book history. This essay will explore how Judge Dredd was created as a reflection of real-world authoritarianism, how he differs from other anti-heroes in comics, the philosophy of law and justice in his world, why his story is more relevant now than ever before. Judge Dredd is not just a comic book character. He is a warning. The question is, will we listen? The birth of Judge Dredd, origins and evolution. 1. The political landscape that created him. Judge Dredd was created in 1977 by writer John Wagner and artist Carlos Escara, debuting in the British comic magazine 2000 AD. This was not a coincidence. The 1970s were a time of political turmoil and rising fears of authoritarianism. Britain was in crisis, struggling with economic collapse, rising crime, and political corruption. The United States was in the aftermath of the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal, with faith in government at an all-time low. The Cold War was escalating, and the fear of nuclear annihilation was ever present. During this time, police forces around the world were becoming more militarized. Governments were expanding surveillance. The idea of a strong leader who could crush crime with an iron fist was becoming more popular in many societies. John Wagner and Carlos Escara saw where this was leading, and they imagined a world where law and order had gone too far. 2. Megacity 1, the city that shows oppression. In the world of Judge Dredd, civilization as we know it is gone. The United States has been devastated by nuclear war, and the survivors live in massive, overcrowded supercities where crime is so rampant that normal law enforcement is useless. Megacity 1 is home to 800 million people, packed into endless city blocks that stretch for miles. There is no work. 80% of the population is unemployed. Most people live in squalor, surviving on government rations and meaningless entertainment. To maintain control, the government abolished democracy and gave absolute power to the judges, an elite force that acts as judge, jury, and executioner. They have unlimited authority. They answer to no one. And the most feared of them all is Judge Dredd. 3. The unstoppable machine, Dredd as a character. Unlike other anti-heroes, Judge Dredd has no personal struggle, no inner conflict, no redemption arc. He is not trying to fix the system. He is the system. Dredd does not question the law. He does not hesitate. If the law says you are guilty, you die. If you steal food because you're starving, 25 years in the ISO cubes, prison. If you protest against the government, immediate execution. If you stay outside past curfew. Shot on sight. He does not care if the law is fair. He does not care if the system is broken. His only concern is enforcing the law. And that is what makes him both a necessary protector and the ultimate oppressor. 2. Judge Dredd vs. other antiheroes. What makes him different? 1. The difference between Dredd and Batman, the Punisher, or Wolverine. Most antiheroes in comics follow a similar pattern. They operate outside the law because they believe the law is broken. They have personal trauma that drives them. They wrestle with morality and justice. Judge Dredd has none of this. He does not operate outside the law, he is the law. He has no personal trauma, he was engineered for this job. He does not wrestle with morality, and morality is irrelevant to him. This makes Dredd a completely unique character in comic book history. 2. Why Dredd is more terrifying than any other antihero. Batman and the Punisher fight crime, but they do not control society. Judge Dredd is not just a crime fighter, he is the enforcer of a police state. He is the ultimate government tool, the embodiment of a society that has surrendered its freedom. And the scariest part? He believes he is right. 3. Judge Dredd and the real-world rise of authoritarianism. Judge Dredd is not just a dystopian fantasy, he is a reflection of real-world political trends. His world is terrifying because it is based on a logical extension of things that are already happening in our society. 1. The real-world rise of police militarization. One of the most disturbing aspects of Judge Dredd is the militarization of law enforcement. In Megacity 1, the judges are not just policemen, they are paramilitary enforcers. They ride heavily armored motorcycles, lawmasters, carry high-tech weapons, lawgivers, and have the authority to execute citizens on the spot. This might have seemed like an extreme concept in 1977. But today, we see disturbing parallels in real-world policing. Police forces are using military-grade weapons, armored vehicles, and surveillance drones. SWAT teams are deployed for routine law enforcement actions, sometimes against civilians who have committed minor offenses. Protests are crushed with excessive force, and dissent is treated as a crime. In many ways, Judge Dredd is no longer science fiction, it is a warning that is becoming reality. 2. The erosion of civil liberties in the name of security. Megacity 1 is built on the idea that freedom is dangerous and security is more important than democracy. This is exactly how authoritarian governments rise in the real world. They use fear to justify extreme measures. They convince people to trade freedom for safety. They create an enemy, criminals, terrorists, dissenters, to justify total control. We have seen this pattern repeated throughout history. The Nazi regime in Germany used the threat of communists and crime to justify absolute control. The Patriot Act in the US expanded government surveillance in the name of fighting terrorism. China's social credit system monitors and punishes citizens for undesirable behavior. Judge Dredd's world is terrifying because it is an exaggerated version of our own world, a world where people have surrendered their rights without realizing it. 4. The philosophy of law when justice becomes oppression. 1. The difference between law and justice. Judge Dredd raises one of the most important moral questions in history. Is the law the same as justice? In Megacity 1, the answer is no. The law is absolute, but it is not always fair. The law protects order, but it does not always protect people. The law punishes criminals, but it does not address the root causes of crime. In real life, we see the same problem. Slavery was legal. Apartheid was legal. Segregation was legal. Many authoritarian regimes commit atrocities legally. Judge Dredd forces us to ask: if a law is unjust, should it be obeyed? And more importantly, what happens when no one is allowed to question the law? 2. The psychological effect of absolute power. One of the most fascinating aspects of Judge Dredd is the psychological impact of absolute authority. Dredd is not a corrupt judge. He does not take bribes. He does not abuse his power for personal gain. And yet, he is terrifying. Why? Because he has no human compassion. He has been conditioned to believe that following the law is more important than human life. He does not question orders, even when they seem cruel. He has no emotions, no regrets, and no room for mercy. Real-world history has shown us that when people are given absolute power, they often lose their humanity. The Stanford Prison Experiment, 1971, showed how normal people become cruel when given authority. Police brutality increases when officers believe they are above the law. Governments justify extreme measures when they believe the ends justify the means. Judge Dredd is not evil, but he has lost the ability to question whether what he is doing is right. And that is the most terrifying thing of all. The real villain, the system, not the man. One of the biggest misconceptions about Judge Dredd is that he is the villain of his own story. But that is not entirely true. The real villain is the system that created him. 1. The judges are a necessary evil. Mega City 1 is a nightmare. Crime is so rampant that normal policing is impossible. Without the judges, the city would collapse into chaos. In a way, the judges are necessary. If they show weakness, the city will fall. If they allow freedom, criminals will take over. If they hesitate, anarchy will destroy civilization. The horror of Judge Dredd's world is that there is no good solution. If you abolish the judges, crime spirals out of control. If you keep the judges, people live under oppression. Mega City 1 is trapped in a cycle of fear and control, and there is no way out. 2. The people have accepted their oppression. The most disturbing part of Mega City 1 is that the people do not fight back. They do not demand democracy. They do not rebel against the judges. They have accepted that they will never be free. In real life, this is how authoritarian regimes survive. They make people believe that resistance is pointless. They control information so people do not realize they are oppressed. They convince people that freedom is dangerous. Judge Dredd is not just about a fascist future. It is about how people willingly accept oppression, and how, by the time they realize it, it is too late. 6. The future of Dredd, why he will always be relevant. Judge Dredd has remained one of the most important characters in comics for almost 50 years because his story will never stop being relevant. Every time a government expands its power, Dredd becomes more relevant. Every time police brutality increases, Dredd becomes more relevant. Every time people trade freedom for security, Dredd becomes more relevant. His world is not just a nightmare, it is a reflection of the direction our world is heading. 1. Why Judge Dredd will never be a hero. Some anti-heroes, like the Punisher or Deadpool, eventually have moments of redemption. Judge Dredd will never have that. He will never change. He will never question the system. Because if he does, Mega City 1 will collapse. And that is why he is the most important anti-hero in comics. 7. Conclusion, would you fight Dredd or follow him? Judge Dredd asks us a terrifying question. If you lived in Mega City 1, would you fight back? Or would you accept the system? Because here's the scariest part. Most people would choose security over freedom. And that is why the nightmare of Judge Dredd's world is one we cannot escape. Because it is already happening. The only question is, will we realize it before it is too late? Judge Dredd is more than just a comic, it is a warning. It forces us to question. How much freedom are we willing to sacrifice for security? When does law enforcement stop being about justice and start being about control? Are we unknowingly creating a system where absolute power goes unchallenged? If you found this deep dive fascinating, let's keep the conversation going. What do you think? Is Judge Dredd a necessary evil, or is he the ultimate warning against unchecked authority? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you see real-world parallels with Megacity 1? Hit that like button if you want more deep, thought-provoking content on comics. Subscribe to African Reads Comics so you don't miss upcoming breakdowns on the greatest characters and stories in the comic book world. Megacity 1 may be fictional, but the questions it raises are very real. Let's talk about it.